In the small village of Ukoro, Madame Clara's soup was the talk of the town. Her food stall was always crowded, with long lines of villagers waiting for a taste of her famous soup. The scent would fill the air, making it impossible for anyone to pass by without stopping for a bowl. The soup had a rich, spicy flavor, with a taste that no one could ever quite describe. Some said it was sweet, others claimed it had a deep, smoky flavor, but no one could pinpoint exactly what made it so delicious. It was as though every batch had a magic of its own. Madame Clara had been selling her soup for years, and over time, she became the most respected food vendor in the village. The villagers loved her not just for her soup but for her warm heart. She always greeted everyone with a smile and a kind word. But despite her popularity, there was one thing that no one knew about Madame Clara: where she got her ingredients. No one had ever seen her shop for food, and every morning, the ingredients for her soup would appear on her store, fresh and abundant. People would sometimes ask her, "Where do you get your vegetables, Madame Clara?" But she would simply smile and say, "From the earth, my dear." It was enough to satisfy anyone who asked. But Charles, a curious young boy, had started to wonder, was there more to Madame Clara's soup than anyone realized? Charles was always full of questions. He was an adventurous boy, always seeking answers to the mysteries of the world around him. When he first tasted Madame Clara's soup, he thought it was the best thing he had ever eaten. But as time went on, he started to notice something strange. Every time he visited her store, the soup was never the same. It was always perfect, always delicious. But the ingredients, he could never figure out where they came from. Unlike the other villagers, Charles wasn't content with just enjoying the soup. He wanted to know its secret. He started asking around, trying to gather any information he could about Madame Clara. But everyone who knew her just praised her cooking skills and said that she was a gifted woman with a special touch. No one seemed to question her methods, and Charles couldn't understand why. One afternoon, after finishing his bowl of soup, Charles decided he would find out for himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was going on behind the scenes. If Madame Clara was so good at making soup, why didn't anyone ask how she did it? Determined to uncover the mystery, Charles decided to follow her after the market closed one evening. That evening, as the sun set and the village quieted down, Charles decided to put his plan into action. He waited until Madame Clara finished serving her last customer and packed up her stall. He quietly followed her from a distance, making sure to stay hidden behind the trees and houses along the road. Madame Clara walked briskly, her basket filled with nothing but a few small bags. It was strange, she didn't have the usual bags of vegetables or spices that people carried. Charles continued to follow her through the village and into the woods, where the path became less clear. Madame Clara's cottage was on the outskirts of the village, nestled in a quiet area surrounded by trees. It was a small but cozy house, and the windows were lit up with a warm glow. As she entered, Charles stayed hidden behind a bush, watching curiously. What happened next would leave him stunned. From behind the window, he could see her moving around the kitchen, but there was something odd. He noticed a faint movement inside that looked like a shadow passing by. At first, he thought it was just the flickering of the firelight, but when he looked closely, he could see it wasn't a shadow. There was something, or someone, moving inside. But who? And what was it? Charles had never been one to shy away from a challenge, and his curiosity was now piqued more than ever. He had seen something in the window, something that didn't look human. He crouched lower behind the bush, barely daring to breathe, his eyes fixed on the glowing window. Through the glass, he saw Madame Clara standing by her stove, humming softly. But what startled him was the small creature that appeared next to her. It was no bigger than a cat, with glowing red eyes and slimy, wrinkled skin. It looked like something out of a nightmare. The creature moved swiftly around the kitchen, collecting jars and strange ingredients from the shelves. Madame Clara didn't seem afraid. In fact, she seemed to be talking to it in a calm, friendly manner, as if it was an old friend. The creature handed her a small jar filled with a glowing green liquid, and she poured it into the soup pot. Charles watched in awe as she stirred the contents, and the soup began to bubble with a strange, almost magical energy. The creature didn't speak in any language Charles could understand, but its presence was unmistakable. It was helping Madame Clara, but how and why? What was the true secret behind her soup? Charles couldn't tear his eyes away. He had to know more. But for now, he would have to wait. He didn't want Madame Clara to catch him spying, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had uncovered something truly mysterious. The next morning, Charles couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. The creature, the glowing liquid, the way Madame Clara walked alongside it, it was all too strange to be a coincidence. He went to Madame Clara's stall as usual, eager to taste the soup again. The moment he took a spoonful, he was reminded of the magic he had witnessed the night before. The soup was, as always, perfect. But now, with what he knew, the soup tasted different. Charles couldn't shake the thought that something dark was hidden behind its delicious flavor. He glanced around at the people in line, none of them knowing the secret he had uncovered. They were all happily talking, praising Madame Clara for her talent and her soup. No one seemed to question where she got her ingredients from. But Charles knew there was more to the story. As Charles delved deeper into his investigation, he began to notice subtle changes in the village. Some villagers claimed to feel inexplicably energized after eating Madame Clara's soup, while others spoke of vivid dreams filled with strange, otherworldly visions. One elderly man even claimed that his chronic back pain had disappeared overnight. Was the soup a blessing or something more sinister? Charles started to document his observations, sketching the creature he had seen and writing down his theories. He even enlisted the help of his best friend, Ada, a girl as curious as he was and skilled in herbal remedies. Together, they decided to uncover the truth behind Madame Clara's secret ingredients. They would need courage, wit, and perhaps a little magic of their own. Charles had always been curious, but nothing could have prepared him for the strange events that began to unfold in his small village. The discovery of Madame Clara's secret set off a chain of events that would test his courage, his friendships, and the very fabric of the community. He decided he couldn't keep this secret to himself. It wasn't right to let Madame Clara deceive the villagers. But what could he do? How could he expose the truth without anyone thinking he was crazy? Charles knew one thing for sure: he had to find out more. There was a bigger mystery to unravel. That night, Charles couldn't stop thinking about the creature and the soup. The more he thought about it, the more determined he became. He had to find out what was really happening in Madame Clara's kitchen. There was something unnatural about the whole situation, and Charles knew that he couldn't let it go. The next day, he decided to tell his best friend, Emma, about what he had seen. She was skeptical at first. "Are you sure it wasn't just your imagination?" she asked. "You know, sometimes things look strange when you're tired or in the dark." But Charles was insistent. He knew what he had seen, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the villagers were being deceived. Emma finally agreed to help him. They made a plan to sneak into Madame Clara's house and find out what the creature was doing. That night, they waited until the village was quiet and everyone had gone to bed. Charles and Emma slipped out of their houses and made their way to Madame Clara's cottage. They hid behind the tall bushes near her window, peeking through the leaves. "We'll wait for her to start cooking, then we'll figure out what that creature is," Charles whispered. Emma nodded nervously but stayed quiet. The plan was simple, but they both knew that something dangerous could happen if Madame Clara caught them snooping around. As the night grew darker, Charles and Emma waited. The wind rustled through the trees, and the only sound was the chirping of crickets. Finally, they saw the light in Madame Clara's kitchen flicker on. She entered, looking as calm as ever. The strange creature was already there, waiting by the stove. It scuttled over to Madame Clara, holding what appeared to be a bundle of herbs. Charles and Emma watched in silence as Madame Clara and the creature walked together. Madame Clara stirred the pot, and the soup began to glow with a strange, eerie light. "It's the same as last time," whispered Charles, his eyes wide in disbelief. "It's like she's using magic." The creature handed Madame Clara another glowing jar, this one filled with a shimmering liquid. Madame Clara added it to the soup, and the glow became even more intense. Charles felt his heart race. He had seen enough. He and Emma waited for the right moment, then slipped away unnoticed. They couldn't let anyone know what they had seen, not yet. They had to find proof. The next morning, Charles gathered the courage to confront Madame Clara. He approached her stall, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. "Madame Clara," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I know what you've been doing. I saw you last night with that creature. What are you putting in your soup?" Madame Clara's face paled, and for the first time, she didn't smile. "You shouldn't have seen that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's a secret I've kept for years. But now that you know, there's no turning back." The villagers gathered around, hearing the commotion. "What is Charles talking about, Madame Clara?" one of them asked. Madame Clara looked around at the villagers, then at the ground, her shoulders slumped. "I am sorry, everyone," she said, her voice filled with regret. "I used magic to make my soup. I've been working with a creature from the forest, using its help to make the soup perfect. It was wrong, and now I see that I've hurt all of you by keeping this secret." The villagers were shocked. Some gasped in disbelief, while others murmured in confusion. Charles stepped forward. "Madame Clara, we trusted you. But now we know the truth. Your magic isn't natural, and it has to stop." Madame Clara looked up, her face filled with sorrow. "I never meant to deceive anyone. I only wanted to create something that would bring joy. But I see now that my actions were selfish. I must face the consequences." The village elders gathered, and after a long discussion, they decided that Madame Clara would no longer be allowed to sell her soup. The creature was sent back to the forest, and Madame Clara was tasked with making amends. She spent her days apologizing to the villagers and helping them with their work, as she had once helped them with her soup. Though Madame Clara had been a beloved figure, the village learned a valuable lesson that sometimes the things that seem too good to be true are hiding a darker secret. And even the most magical things can come with consequences. But the story didn't end there. As Madame Clara retreated from her role in the village, Charles and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. The creature, a thing of mystery and magic, had left behind questions that demanded answers. Where had it come from? What was the nature of its magic? And why had it agreed to help Madame Clara in the first place? In their quest to learn more, Charles and Emma began to explore the forest. It was a place of whispered legends and forbidden paths, said to be filled with wonders and dangers alike. The villagers spoke of ancient spirits, hidden groves, and secrets guarded by time. Armed with only their courage and curiosity, the pair ventured deeper into the unknown. The forest was unlike anything they had imagined. Trees with twisting, shimmering leaves formed a canopy that blocked out the sun, casting an otherworldly glow over the ground. Strange plants glowed faintly in the dark, and the air was filled with a hum that seemed almost musical. As they pressed on, Charles and Emma encountered clues about the creature's origins, symbols carved into the bark of ancient trees, fragments of forgotten stories etched into stone, and traces of a power that felt both old and alive. At one point, they stumbled upon an abandoned clearing with a circle of stones that seemed to pulse with energy. Emma knelt to examine the stones, tracing the runes with her fingers. These symbols, they are not just decorations. They are language, Charles. A warning, maybe. Or a map, Charles said, his eyes alight with excitement. Maybe this is how we find out where the creature came from. The deeper they went, the more perilous their journey became. Shadows moved where no one was walking, and whispers drifted on the breeze, as though the forest itself was alive and watching. Despite their fear, they pressed on, driven by the need to understand. Their persistence paid off when they discovered a hidden glade unlike anything they had ever seen. At its center was a pool of water so clear it seemed almost invisible, reflecting the sky above. And there, standing by the pool, was the creature. It was no longer the small, scuttling figure they had seen in Madame Clara's kitchen. In the forest, it stood tall, its form shifting and shimmering like a mirage. Its eyes, deep and knowing, fixed on Charles and Emma. To their astonishment, the creature spoke. "You have come far," it said, its voice a harmonious blend of tones. "Why do you seek me?" Charles stepped forward, his heart pounding. "We need to understand. Who are you? Why did you help Madame Clara? What is the magic in the soup?" The creature regarded them for a long moment before replying. "I am a guardian of this forest, a being of balance and creation. Madame Clara stumbled upon this place long ago. She was kind, and I wished to help her. But in doing so, I upset the balance. The magic of the soup was never meant to be shared so freely. It has consequences, as all magic does." Emma frowned. "Consequences? What kind?" "The land suffers," the creature said. "The more the magic is used, the weaker the forest becomes. I agreed to help her because I believed she would use the magic sparingly, with respect. But she did not understand the cost." Realizing the gravity of the situation, Charles and Emma vowed to help the creature restore balance. They returned to the village, this time with a message of unity and healing. Together with the villagers, they worked to undo the harm caused by the overuse of magic. They planted trees, cared for the land, and learned to rely on their own skills and resources rather than the enchanted soup. Madame Clara, too, found redemption. She became a teacher, sharing her knowledge of cooking and her lessons about the cost of magic. The villagers forgave her, and the community grew stronger, bonded by their shared experiences. In time, the forest began to heal, its glow returning brighter than ever. The creature watched over it all, a silent guardian content to remain in the shadows. And though Charles and Emma would never forget the dangers they had faced, they knew they had been part of something extraordinary, a story that would be told for generations to come.